Okay, we are live.
Okay, thank you, Keen. Sorry, Bob. Good morning, ad hoc committee members, other interested stakeholders, and members of the public that may be present. Today is Thursday, February 17th, 2022, and this meeting is now convened at 10:02 a.m. Before we get started, I'd like to make a quick notation that we have a new committee member serving with us today. His name is Keith Greer. Keith works for Sandag and replaces Rachel Cortez, who served on this committee in the same capacity and from the same agency. Keith made note to me that he will be arriving late to the meeting today, roughly around 10:30. So if anybody sees an unfamiliar face that is participating in the discussion and deliberations, you now know why. So we will welcome Keith as he arrives, but just wanted to make that notation. So with that said, we can move on to a roll call. And if we could have Tammy, our commission clerk or committee clerk, proceed with that.
Good morning. Brian Albright.
Here.
Jack Beebe.
I'm here. Can I choose an alternative member or is that not possible?
Keith Greer is absent. Gary Croucher. Gary Croucher. Let's see, muted. Nick Canettis.
Here.
Tom Kennedy.
With bells on.
Sandy Curl.
Here.
Lydia Romero.
Here.
Nick Serrano.
Here.
Kimberly Thorner.
Here.
Is Gary Croucher on the line or no?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay, you're present.
We're good.
Okay. I have nine present with one absent. There is a virtual quorum. So ends roll call.
Thank you, Tammy. Appreciate that. We will now move on to item number 3, which is the agenda review by the moderator. I would like to take a couple minutes to lay down some ground rules for today's meeting. I want to respect everybody's time today. And as Kim mentioned before we got started, it sounds like everybody has some sort of prior commitment and hard time to stop and move on to other obligations. So I will be doing everything in my capacity today to end this meeting at 12 noon. I also want to footnote in advance that when we get to Dr. Hanneman's final report, he will be making a short presentation. We will welcome a brief Q&A session, and we will open up the item for discussion. And it's my hope that we can keep the level of discourse on point, concise, and not exhaust our time with a full regurgitation of the wealth of information that has already been provided in written communication, some of which has been as early as yesterday and the day before. So hopefully all parties and all committee members can respect everybody's time, and we can complete this meeting in a timely fashion. I also want to make it clear that today's end game is not to convince Dr. Hanneman to go back and provide any supplemental analysis. His body of work concludes today related to this committee. However, LAFCO will continue to entertain any written comments to his report, and should LAFCO deem it necessary to engage Dr. Hanneman for any additional review in the future during our process, we will do so independently and outside of this committee. Lastly, to conclude Hanneman's final report, I will be asking each committee member individually to go on record as to whether or not they believe Dr. Hanneman's fulfilled his obligation and responsibility, submitted a report satisfactory and complete to the task at hand, which was to evaluate 3 topics related to water reliability, rates, and a potential exit fee. So more to come with that as we get to that item, but I just wanted to kind of lay a little groundwork with that, with respect to time and our process. And one other note, which is separate but on a related matter, I want to turn it over to Alex, who's our counsel for today, and give him a quick opportunity to discuss the relation and legal components between Rainbow and Fallbrook's proposal and the multiple service review for the Fallbrook area that's concurrently being worked on, which is also agendized for us today to receive an update. So Alex, can you just kind of briefly make point to that?
Sure. Thanks, Adam. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to repeat some of the things actually that Adam said too. I just want to start by talking about the scope of this committee. This is an ad hoc committee. Under the Brown Act, an ad hoc committee is advisory in nature. In other words, this body isn't expected to render any decisions as noted by Adam. Additionally, this body is advisory to staff, not the commission. The ultimate recommendation to the commission will come from the executive officer, and that recommendation will be informed by input from this ad hoc committee. I want to note that we reviewed and received all the letters and public comments from the various agencies and their legal counsel. Many of those letters pose legal questions. Those legal questions will be answered in a public memo by LAFCO counsel prior to the commission's consideration of this item, but they are outside the scope of the meeting for today. Dr. Heinemann's report is based on his economic and technical analysis of facts. As noted many times, Dr. Heinemann is an economist, not an attorney, and his opinions and conclusions do not legally bind the commission or staff's independent analysis. Like the ad hoc committee, Dr. Heinemann's report is intended to be advisory. Lastly, it's important to note that we not stray from the agenda, as Adam noted. Our two main items are Dr. Heinemann's report in agenda item 5B and the municipal services review in agenda item 5C. The discussion of each item will be taken separately. For item 5B, only discussion regarding water rate impacts, water supply reliability, and a potential departure fee are relevant. For item 5C, only discussion regarding the services provided by Fallbrook Public Utilities District, Rainbow Municipal Water District, North County Fire Protection District, and County Service Area number 81 are relevant. If there are other items that were not covered, you can request that they be agendized during the discussion of item 5, during the discussion of item 5B, titled Agenda Setting for the Next Meeting. Back to you, Adam.
Alex, thank you. I appreciate the added information and much appreciated. We can now move on to item 4, which is public comment. This is an opportunity for any member of the public to provide comments on a non-agenda topic germane to the advisory committee. Comments will be limited to 3 minutes. I will ask the committee clerk if there are any pre or current slips from the members of the public that wish to speak today.
No pre-registered comments received.
Thank you, Tammy. We can now move on to our business items, which is items 5 on the agenda. Item 5A is the approval of action minutes for our October 4th, 2021 meeting. The advisory committee will review draft minutes prepared by the commission clerk for October 4th, 2021 special meeting. The draft minutes before you are in action format and recommended for your approval, and I may entertain any motion at this time.
I'll move approval.
Gary. And second by Gary Croucher.
We have a motion by Tom and a second by Gary. Tammy, can you please do a roll call?
Yes. Brian Albright,
Aye.
Jack Beebe,
Yes.
Keith Greer is absent. Gary Croucher,
Yes.
Nick Canetis,
Yes.
Tom Kennedy,
Yes.
Sandy Curl,
Yes.
Lydia Romero,
Yes.
Nick Serrano, Nick Serrano. It must be off the line. Kimberly Thorner,
Yes.
I have 8 in favor, 0 opposed. The motion passes.
Thank you, Tammy. We can now move on to business item 5B, and this is the consultant report and final report for the Fallbrook Public Utilities District and Rainbow Municipal Water District. The advisory committee will now receive a final report and analysis from consultant Dr. Michael Heinemann related to the Fallbrook and Rainbow proposed reorganization and detachment from the County Water Authority service area. As I noted earlier, a brief questions and answer session will be provided between Dr. Hanneman and stakeholders, as well as a deliberation proceeding amongst the committee members to take any appropriate action as requested and needed. So Dr. Hanneman, if we can get started, you have the floor.
Do you want to show my PowerPoint, or should I show? Thanks. Great. So this is my a brief summary of the report that you got a month ago. There's a lot of words in it, and I just want to summarize here some of the main points. Slide 2, please. So just to summarize, I was engaged to address 3 topics which are listed here. I was engaged to do this as an economist, and the report you received contains my opinions based on the information available to me. And much of that information comes from you, the members of the advisory committee, and I greatly appreciate your making time available to share with me and educate me. Next slide, please. So in my report, I used the term M-water and E-water, and I just wanted to explain what I mean by that. M-water is water that the authority receives from Metropolitan as a member agency. But the authority also has QSA water, which is handed over to Metropolitan, and Metropolitan delivers a like amount of water under the exchange agreement, and I call that E-water. So in the last few years, Fallbrook and Rainbow have received a mix of water coming out of the turnouts that was 80% E-water and 20% M-water. If they detach and join Eastern, they will be receiving 100% M-water. And the key point is that chemically, the water may be physically indistinguishable, but they're legally different with regard to the water right and their reliability. That's the key point. They're different. Next slide, please. They're different legally. They're also different in costs. And this is my, so they are roughly the same cost as a source to the water authority. Historically, there may have been some difference, but my best estimate is the difference in cost, if anything, was small. This shows the breakdown of the cost. The water itself is more expensive, so Imperial receives a higher price than Metropolitan was willing to pay in 1985 when it made its first purchase from IID. The main thing is the conveyance charge is essentially the same to the authority, whether it receives M-water and E-water. That conveyance charge was the subject of prolonged litigation. From what I've seen, it is above what the economic cost would be. But the Court of Appeal ruled, and I think it's important to understand, the Court of Appeal ruled that if you have a lawful rate fixing body of a water agency, whatever rates it establishes are presumed reasonable, fair, and lawful. And I'm not a lawyer, but I assume as a layperson that also applies to rates established by the Water Authority. Next slide, please. So the context for this is really the large increase in the authority's rates since 2009. And I estimate that over this 11-year period, the authority's all-in rate rose by more than doubled. It rose by about 120%. By contrast, Met's all-in rate rose also, but by significantly less. So in 2009, the rate differential was, I think, about $100 an acre foot between Met's all-in rate and the authorities. Today, it's about $400 an acre foot. So it's the gap between Met's rate and the authorities that has widened. Next slide. And so the question is, why? Why did the authorities' rate rise so much faster? And I believe there are three factors. I think the major factor was the drop-off in member agency demand for water from the authority compared with member agency demand with water from Metropolitan. There was a reduction for both wholesale agencies, but the reduction in demand was twice as large as that experienced by Metropolitan. The reduction in demand comes about from conservation by water users served by member agencies, and it also comes about from increased local supply, particularly from reusing treated wastewater effluent from recycling. And so it turns out that the authority experienced twice as large a reduction in demand over a very short period than Metropolitan did. And because both agencies have a heavy share of fixed costs, that would widen the rate differential. The other major factor which stands out is around 2010, the years right before and right after, the authority was making major water infrastructure investments. And Met was making some investments, but not significantly large ones. It had made large ones in an earlier period in the 70s and 80s, and I think it will be making large investments with the for the Delta, but they were out of sync with one another in terms of timing. Carlsbad, the desal water, really only becomes a factor after 2015 because it wasn't a significant finance. Today, it accounts for about $215 of the $399 rate differential. And so there's still a larger differential in wholesale rates than existed in 2009. Next slide, please. The distinctive feature, and this is a problem for many water agencies, and in particular, it's a problem for Metropolitan, even worse than the Water Authority, is this fiscal mismatch between the percent of revenues that vary if you change the acre feet delivered versus the percent of your expenditures that vary. If those two percentages were the same, then basically fluctuations in the amount of water you deliver would be revenue neutral. But they're not. For the authority, currently, there's the disparity. 72% of the revenue varies with each acre change in acre foot delivered, but only 15% of the cost. If demand, this disparity is favorable if your deliveries are growing, because then you get extra revenue, you get more extra revenue than the extra cost. And sales are growing in Riverside County. But in San Diego County, wholesale deliveries are falling. And a rough back of the envelope estimate is that for every 1,000 acre foot less that the authority delivers, it loses in net revenue almost $1 million. And this matters because there's the prospect of a significant reduction in water authority deliveries to its member agencies, both in the next 5, 6, 7 years, but also continuing into the next decade. Next slide. So this is my analysis of the annual financial impact on the authority. And there are two contingencies. One is there's some disagreement as to the impact on property tax revenue received by the authority from the service areas of Fallbrook and Rainbow. And the disagreement extends, as far as I understand it, from the assumption of no reduction in property tax revenue to the possibility of losing all the property tax revenue from that area. And I have no opinion on the issues. This, I think, is a legal matter, but I did the analysis both ways. The other distinction is what I call short run versus long run. And this has to do with Met's readiness to serve charge, because that is based on deliveries by Met to its member agencies over a 10-year period. So the first year in which, if there were a detachment and the authority were taking whatever it is, 18,000 acre-foot less, it still pays the readiness to serve charge to Metropolitan based on the full amount. It'll take 10 years for Metropolitan's readiness to serve charge to be reduced to reflect the fact that the authority is delivering 18,000 acre-foot less. So the short run is when is with Metropolitan's readiness to serve charge unchanged, and the long run is when it's fully adjusted after 10 years. Either way, the net loss, so there's a reduction in revenue of $33 million. There's a reduction in water operations expenses of about $21 million. That leads in the short run to an annual reduction in net revenue of about $12 million, and in the long run of about $11 million. So that's why I have 4 different numbers. Next slide, please. I also tried to estimate the savings for Fallbrook and Rainbow. And one point, their water will still bear Met's readiness to serve charge and its capacity charge. Whether it'll still bear those charges, whether they're served by the Water Authority or by Eastern. But the specific amount of the charges won't necessarily be the same, because these charges come from Metropolitan to the member agency, namely the Water Authority or Eastern, and they depend on the overall amount of delivery over a 10-year period and the overall peak delivery, and those are not the same for Eastern as for the authority. So the amount of the Metropolitan readiness to serve and capacity charges that hit Fallbrook or that hit Rainbow, whether served by one wholesaler or the other, won't be identical. So I've included the Metropolitan charges in my assessment of the rate impact for the authority, and I'm including them here in the impact for Fallbrook and Rainbow. And the bottom line is I estimate that in the first year, they will save about $7.7 million. Next slide, please. So this brings up the issue of a departure fee, which is the third topic. And as I say, my understanding, and maybe it's wrong, is the authority's position that in the event of attachment, they should be liable for about 5% of $21 billion of indebtedness. So about $1 billion, 1/20th or so. And Fallbrook and Rainbow have argued that they should be able to detach without any financial liability. And in my own view, there are arguments, of course, for both positions, but I think both positions are too extreme. However, the real issue is what LAFCO, in the first instance, what the LAFCO staff thinks, and then what the LAFCO Commission itself does. And as I've put it here, I mean, it's a hard decision, and I wouldn't pretend otherwise, but to put it directly, the decision is whether these two member agencies with very much an agricultural basis, located way at the north end of the county, so they're distinctive in a number of ways. Should they be permitted to walk away scot-free, entirely unencumbered by any of the financial commitments that the authority has taken on their behalf and on behalf of the other member agencies, the commitments that have been taken on basically in the last 20 years. That's the decision, and it's the Commission's decision. Next slide, please. So if there's a departure fee, its logic would be to provide financial coverage for an adjustment period. And it's not intended as a payment for water being received. The question of if Fallbrook or Rainbow pay an adjustment fee for, let's say, the next 3 years, shouldn't they be receiving some water? No. The logic is this is a payment for obligations incurred when they were receiving water in the past. This is paying off past obligations. And with regard to the question of the property tax, as has been said, this is a legal issue, and I'm not offering any legal opinion. But I am offering some history, some water history, because I know this history and I've studied it. The crucial point is that until the 1960s, water agencies in California, and for that matter, in most of the country, financed infrastructure by general obligation bonds. And starting in the 60s, there was a major shift to revenue bonds. So my guess as to the history is why the 1947 County Water Act didn't mention or only mention general obligation bonds is because revenue bonds were not used to any significant extent. So this leads to two alternative interpretations. What is the significance that the County Act only mentions general obligation bonds, property tax revenues? And there are two alternative interpretations, at least. One is it didn't mention, the legislature didn't mention revenue bonds or contract supply obligations because those were not a feature of financing urban water supply then. The other possible interpretation is the legislature didn't mention revenue bonds or other long-term contractual supply obligations because it wanted to make an explicit point. It wanted to make the point that a member agency cannot walk away from general obligation bonds, but it can walk away, say, from revenue bonds. Which interpretation will sway a court? I don't know, and it's a legal issue, and I have nothing to say. I just want to explain the historical context in which the County Water Act was framed. Next slide. So in my thinking of a possible departure fee, I looked at the annual payment obligation by the authority for its supply contract for QSA water. It has about $21 billion in indebtedness. About $2 billion of indebtedness, or between 1 and 2, is revenue bonds. But about $19 billion is the committed take-or-pay contracts to pay for QSA water. So what I am showing you here is Fallbrook and Rainbow's share of water delivered to all member agencies by the authority over the last 3 years. I break out the share of M&I deliveries and the share of all deliveries because they also receive some agricultural deliveries under the PSAWR rate schedule. These shares are about the same if you look at the last 5 years or the last 10 years. There's no major difference, and my report gives those numbers. That's looking at their share of an annual payment, this year's annual payment by the authority. Should that payment be made for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, or some other number of years? That's very much a judgment for the commission, and I am not making a specific recommendation. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide, and the last topic is supply reliability. And I just want to say, it turned out last year was a remarkable year. I mean, when we started, we had a meeting, I think, in January, and then we had a meeting in May. And within a week after the May meeting, to put it crudely, all hell broke loose. And both for the Sacramento River, for Northern California's rivers, and for the Colorado River, the same thing happened. In both cases, DWR in California, the Bureau for the Colorado River, tracks precipitation and issues a report each month, January, February, March, you know, predicting stream flow in the coming spring and summer. And on the basis of that, you know, recommending deliveries or the diversions they'll allow. And in May, they discovered that the predictions in each case that they had made in March were off, I think, by 10 or 15%. There was less stream flow than they'd expected. And we now understand that the common factor is higher air temperature leading to drier soil and more evaporation, and a smaller translation of precipitation into stream flow. And the result is, in both cases, the agencies have had to abandon their longtime forecasting models. And there is suddenly an awareness of great uncertainty looking forward. And as you all know, we lived through that, the tremendous rains in December, and then the dryness, you know, in the last 6 weeks since December. So there is enormous uncertainty about future stream flow, and that translates into a lower level of reliability. And all I'm pointing out in the second and third bullets are some basic facts. Riverside County is growing. It's the fastest growing. It will depend. Eastern supplies its retail customers out of its recycled water, but currently is using metropolitan water for its wholesale population. If Fallbrook and Rainbow join Eastern, Rainbow and Paris will be the only Eastern wholesale customers 100% reliant on metropolitan water, at least as things stand now. So the bottom line summary is this: the authority currently relies on metropolitan for less than 20% of its supply, and that's likely to go down in the future. Its other major source is QSA water. That comes from IID, that comes from canal lining, and that has a higher priority than most, but not all, of Metropolitan's water. And therefore, based on this, the authority has a more reliable supply than the supply Eastern will provide to Fallbrook and Rainbow. That's the short summary, with, of course, a lot more detail in my report. Thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Dr. Hammond. Really appreciate that summary. I would like to quickly thank you for your participation on this committee, your working relationship with not just myself, but all committee members and stakeholders that were interested in this process, your professionalism, and most importantly, your expertise on a matter that's very complex. You also went to great lengths to help those that are not experts to understand this issue a bit more. And I'm certain with your work and this report, it will provide great value to our process and consideration by this committee and the LAFCO Commission sometime in the near future. So thank you very much.
My pleasure. And I've learned tremendous amount from working with all of you, and I greatly appreciate your teaching me and your patience with me.
With that said, as I noted earlier, I'd like to open up a very brief, Q&A session. If there's any committee members that have any questions or comments to Dr. Hanneman's report and or summary of it in his presentation today. So Brian, looks like you going to be the first one out of the gate with your hand raised. So why don't you take us away?
Yeah, well, my last name is Albright, so I'm used to having to go first. I do actually have a series of questions, and maybe I'll just ask a couple and then hear other questions and may come back. And it's just, first off, I appreciate today's presentation and your summarization of the final report. Dr. Hanneman, when you were talking about the departure fee, you talked about it really needing to represent, I believe you said, paying off past obligations and not actually, representing the purchase of water for the future. But then, in looking at a potential departure fee, it looked like you were actually comparing or evaluating, the amount of water to be purchased by these two agencies in the next couple of years. So if you have some comments on that in terms of maybe I've misunderstood it or how to reconcile it. And then my second question for you to ponder as well, when we were going through the initial draft report, I recall conversations about a 10-year period as sort of being potentially proposed as a departure fee period. And then in your example in the final report, you've shared that that's really up to LAFCO, and you've suggested 3, 5, 7, all of which are sort of shorter than that 10-year period that we talked about during the draft report. And so I'd be curious as to if there was any additional information or evaluation that sort of led you to just kind of throw out some shorter time periods, or if there's something else that I just missed. Thanks.
Why don't I answer those two, and then so the context is there's an annual payment obligation of 285 million in today's terms. It'll change over time, and that's just for QSA water. So I'm ignoring Carlsbad water and some of the other obligations. And the question is, what's an appropriate share? And I took the share of water of all water deliveries, either all water deliveries or M&I deliveries, which, as I say, has been pretty constant actually over the last 10 years. So I put it as one way of thinking what share of so I was using the share of water received as the share of this cost. You could also calculate the share of QSA water that they received, and all of those numbers are in the report. But it strikes me as when thinking of a share of a cost, to relate it in some manner to the share of water. I think that's not the same as paying for the water, but this cost is being built up by water, by a commitment made in 2003. With regard to the length of time, what I actually said in the report was I thought it should be at least 3 and not more than 10 years, at least 3 years and not more than 10. And then I put some numbers. Now, it really is a judgment. So let me say, if you were the LAFCO Commission or a member of the commission, and I were advising you. What I'd actually like to do, what I do is have a conversation with you, sort of interview you, ask you some questions about, what you think of in terms of these issues. And then I would, and I do that, of course, for other commission members. And then I could shape a recommendation more specifically attuned to the thinking of the commission members, or for that matter, the commission staff. The way this was set up, I haven't had that interaction. And that, Brian, is why I'm vague. And so saying 357, I'm not withdrawing. In the report, I say at least 3 years, because I think nothing changes fast. And 10 years, the Metropolitan uses a 10-year adjustment period. I mean, I know the authority uses 3 or 5 years, but I think it's somewhere within that range, and it's a subjective judgment of equity on the part of LAFCO staff and the part of LAFCO Commission. And since I've had no interaction with them, I can't sort of, I could say what I might do if I were on the commission, but that's a waste of paper, because so that's why I stopped where I did stop.
Thank you.
Tom, I think you had your hand up next if you want to go.
I'll defer to Kim, let her get in there before I get going.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you, Dr. Hanneman, for your work today. I agree with Mr. Albright, Herculean effort on this report. I did have a question, slide 12, and you just mentioned it. It said ignoring Carlsbad water. And I noticed that it only includes IID and All-American Canal water. Why not include desal water, as it is an ongoing fixed obligation of the Water Authority under a take-or-pay contract?
You have an argument. You have arguments made by Fallbrook-Rainbow that they get no benefit from Carlsbad. Now, I don't accept that argument, because districts, member agencies that do receive Carlsbad water free up water that goes to Rainbow. And so, the whole logic, and you all know this, this is not a la carte. As a member agency, you can't come along and say, I want QSA water, I don't want MWD water or whatever, and only deliver these molecules to me. It doesn't work like that. You can't pick and choose. But I thought, if you were trying to work something out and you're looking for some middle ground, as a matter of practice, it might simplify things to focus, as I do, only on the QSA water. But that is a judgment, and again, the question is really how LAFCO commission members see this. And so with all of these things, there are powerful arguments on both sides. I was trying to sort of find a middle ground, but it's not a narrow middle ground. It's a broad middle ground.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Tom.
All right, well, thanks, Adam. And first, I want to thank all of you on the ad hoc committee for, what's it been, 18 months we've been at this thing. I know Mr. Greer is brand new. He hasn't suffered as much as the rest of you, but I want to thank you for sticking through this process. It's been longer than I'm sure all of us had expected. I also want to thank Dr. Hanneman for his work. We didn't always agree on every point, but I appreciate that the job is now complete and we can move forward on processing the applications. But just a couple of points. In his comments, he used terms like scot-free and things like that, which was never proposed in our applications. There would be no payment whatsoever. As you may recall, when Supervisor Jacob recommended this committee to be formed, it was so that we could come together and find some middle ground. I think that if you read the letters and whatnot, finding middle ground here is not really something that's likely going to happen here. Both Fallbrook and Rainbow had tried with the Water Authority to find middle ground prior to our application being submitted and have continued since. And even in submittals we put in last year and even the one this week, we've outlined other potential middle grounds other than just the payment of property tax. And I think that there's an important part of that report that is instructive here, especially for folks who are within the Water Authority, which I know Kim is, and we have Nick from the City of San Diego, in that this concept of a member agency having obligations that are based on past water demands do exist at the Water Authority. They're in their rates and charges, and they roll off over 3 and 5 years. And that's the structure that's been established in the Water Authority. Within the Water Authority's rules and regulations itself, there is no obligation of any member agency to buy any amount of water. If I found a miracle well in the San Luis River tomorrow and stopped buying water, my payments to the Water Authority would drop off to near zero over 3 to 5 years. And that's what we've proposed, rather than pegging something to an arbitrary selection of QSA water over desal water and not including desal water or whatever, like Kim indicated. That's an arbitrary distinction of some obligation based on some other metric that isn't really bound to what the rules and regulations that the Water Authority are and how member agencies have interacted with that going forward. There is no doubt that we agree, and that the City of San Diego led the charge in the long-range financing plan at the Water Authority, that there's a structural imbalance on how expenses and revenues are done. And there's a lot of work going on right now, led by the city and a number of member agencies to try to reform those structures at the Water Authority. Who knows? That's been tried before. We'll see if that happens. I think that that's an important distinction here when trying to say we have the County Water Authority Act, which says you pay property taxes and obligations based on general obligation bonds, and then take it all the way to you have an obligation because you bought water. And that's a challenge for us. And I think the last point I'll make regard to liability, I don't disagree with the supply mixes he states, the growth figures he states, that there are challenges both on the Colorado River, which we've all seen, and in the State Water Project. But Eastern Municipal Water District, as well as both of our districts, have studied the process, and in urban water management plans that all our agencies do, the needs of our ratepayers can be satisfied 100% from Eastern. And whether the Water Authority is slightly more reliable or Eastern slightly less reliable, the fact is that there'll be ample supply for our customers to meet their needs in any drought scenario, as documented through studies done by Eastern and by both Fallbrook and Rainbow. And so when we look at the 3 items here with supply reliability, you could say the Water Authority is slightly more reliable, but it doesn't from a Ortiz-Hertzberg perspective. Is there adequate supply? Will there be supply for our water? Is there impacts to the Water Authority? Yes, we've never disputed there were. And then I think that he's closer in this number. I think that we don't have a major dispute with those numbers. With the departure fee, I think that's where we have a more significant variance in opinion, in that not only is it larger than the economic impact of the Water Authority, which seems strange to us, is that it's not moored in a way that the Water Authority structure works today. So we're going to continue to work with LAFCO to help them as staff goes through their work now that this phase is wrapping up, so that hopefully we can come to a mutually agreeable conclusion, both for LAFCO, the Water Authority, and our agencies in the ultimate proposal that's brought to the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Is there any other committee members that have questions or comments? Nick, I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Dr. Hanneman, first of all, I want to just thank you for this report. I thought it was extremely thorough and helpful to myself and the team here at the City of San Diego. I think for us, it really set the table for the conversation and the considerations that are in front of us and are in front of LAFCO. As you might imagine, one of the areas that the city reviewed with great interest is the parts of this that contemplated a departure fee versus roll-off. And so, Dr. Hanneman, I would like to ask, just for the record, just if you wouldn't mind kind of extrapolating just a bit more on what you considered as part of this contemplation and your analysis of a departure fee and roll-off and how those are different from one another.
So first of all, I'm very aware of the fact that both in the authority and I think in Metropolitan and in many other water agencies, wholesale agencies, which have member agencies. The practice is that member agencies don't make commitments, to the future. So the agency makes investments, and member agencies, and it has advantages for member agencies. It leaves all of you maximum flexibility, and there's all sorts of uncertainty, and so flexibility is very legitimate. I do think this is a broken model now, it's kind of nobody's fault, but I think we find ourselves here, sort of at the cusp of a change. And what's driving this is both the sort of amazing conservation that has taken place in the last 11 years. So I got a hostile email from Peter Glick. When I was interviewed by Joshua Smith, I said nobody could have expected this. And Peter pounded the table and said, the Pacific Institute, we expected this. We've been saying this. But what I mean is nobody expected the magnitude of the change and the speed of the change. I wrote a report for the State Board in 1986 saying Southern California could use less water per capita. We all knew it was humanly possible, but whether it would happen. So what I'm saying is this really is sort of a tidal wave, the conservation, and also now the prospect of potable reuse, indirect if not direct. And again, in 1986, at the Bay Delta hearings, that was promised. It's 35 years later, but now it's, so this really creates, I think, a crisis for all wholesale suppliers, particularly for Metropolitan, I think even more for Metropolitan than for the authority. So, and in this new situation, there really is no material difference between roll-off and departure. These are very dramatic reductions, in deliveries coming in a short period of time in the wake of, very large financial obligations, whether revenue bond obligations or, supply. And so, so one dimension is, can we lower costs? And one aspect of that is, can we offload the water? The one thing I'd say is, my own take, for what it's worth, is I'd rather offload Carlsbad than USA water. Carlsbad water is insurance, and insurance is most valuable when there's the maximum risk diversification. I mean, when it's spread over the maximum pool of covered people. But, and the other thing is, even if you, even sharing the QSA water, that may be necessary, that may be, but all these things take time to be worked out. And I think there will need to be an understanding among the member agencies about, you can look at it two ways, higher fixed charges and or taking obligation to cover a certain share of the supply portfolio. I think because we know there will be reductions coming online, particularly potable reuse, and this is a good thing. It's desirable, but it's a matter of timing. 50 years from now, we will need all this water, I think, in California. But for the next 10 or 15 years, it's going to be very bumpy if demand suddenly drops away. And so there has to be some sort of compact, as it were, among the member agencies within the authority, and I think within MET, and ideally between MET, between the authority as a member agency to really work out a plan to share costs. And as I say, in this context, legally roll-off is not the same as a departure, but in practice, it's very similar. It's like you have two fires threatening you, and both of these are fires, and you have to fireproof the house. And that's how I see this.
I appreciate that very much. And so, certainly given that, I do believe this is a significant issue. And as I said, I think your report and your comments set a basis for discussion. And so, given the potential impacts to the city and to the region, the statewide significance of the decision and the potential detachment represents, I would just say from the city's perspective, we believe this warrants a further contemplation by this committee and LAFCO as well. And so I think, the city would request that we do a deeper dive in analysis on this issue, hopefully as part of another meeting of this committee. And the city would welcome, the opportunity to discuss how to go about this further with LAFCO. I will also say that I think that there's other issues after, going through the report that this committee should consider. One of them I think is voting. I think, how that would work. It's certainly questions that have been raised here. So I would just ask one process question, Adam. Is there any type of action that needs to be taken today with regard to the report?
Yeah, once we hopefully we can speed along this Q&A. And of course, I don't want to muzzle anybody with their questions or comments, but in terms of process with this item, yeah, I would like to get everybody individually on the record if they deem that Dr. Hanneman has fulfilled his duty and responsibility with submitting this report, and any other comments or direction that each individual seems necessary with relation to that. So I would like to take that step after we conclude this Q&A, hopefully in the next, maybe 5 to 10 minutes.
Understood. Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. And thanks again, Dr. Hanneman.
Thank you.
Jack, you had your hand up. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And I first want to thank Dr. Hanneman. This was a big effort, fairly challenging. Obviously, the parties see things differently, but, a lot of good information in here. And I think, the conclusion you just said, I think the issue here is a bigger issue than really detachment. It brought forward what are some real significant issues, not just with the Water Authority, but with the Water Authority and Met that really can only be solved with them together. So I think that's a great takeaway. And part of the challenge is, those investments spread over just the Water Authority become somewhat challenging. So I really appreciate that sort of takeaway. A couple of questions though that I had. So, one of the items you have in the report is the idea that the QSA water is actually less expensive than the MWD water. So, and then when you go back and you say the benefit we received of receiving that water in the past set up some financial obligation, but in that case, I guess in the case going forward, if we leave, they don't buy that Met water and it's replaced with QSA water that's cheaper. Right. So in that case, there's a financial benefit of losing that increment of Met water, correct?
There's a small price difference. I don't think this is a major benefit. I mean, this year it's a bit cheaper, but I think in the scheme of things, the price difference is very small. And I was saying that's partly because I think Matt has arranged the pricing so that they are around the same, they do cost in the same ballpark.
Okay. But then going forward, as long as they purchase all that water, either that water or Met water, even though it's a take or pay contract, from a unit cost perspective, they're equivalent, right? So there's no additional water cost if we leave on a unit cost basis between Met water and QSA water, correct?
Except there's no commitment to buy Met water, and there is the commitment to buy
Right.
QSA water.
Right.
Yeah.
But as long as they take it all, as long as there's not more supply than demand.
There's not
Right.
any substantial difference between the cost of those two.
Okay. And then just curious, so you ended up with the departure fee. When we first talked departure fee, it was the idea that it gave the Water Authority time to adjust, right? So Fallbrook-Rainbow leave, there's some revenue impact. They need some time to adjust. Is there anything with the fact that the payment is actually higher than the net revenue impact? So there's a couple $1 million more in revenue that we would pay than the actual net revenue impact. So our net revenue impact was, 10 to 12 million. the departure fee is 13 to 18. So they would actually, in over 10 years, you'd be talking about, $50 million more paid to the water authority with no services being provided.
So it's a little more complicated. So just to back up, in the draft report in October, I did try to do a multi-year analysis, and I didn't try that here just because I think things are going to bounce around from one year to another looking forward, both the amount of water, but also costs. One other difference, as you'll have noticed, is the issue of reserves. And you and Tom both challenged my treatment of reserves in the draft report, and I agreed with you, and that's why I made the change. But I did this analysis using the rates for this calendar year, 2022. And what I do take from this experience is the rates could really bounce around because of reserves, right? So the point the authority made was the rates for 22 and 2021 were lower than they would have been because they were drawing down some reserves, but they wouldn't be drawing down reserves sort of every year forever. And so what I'm saying is the rates and therefore the revenues, could easily move around $2, $3, $4 million from one year to the next. And the authority is saying its rates were unduly low because it was relying on reserves for this year. So what I want to say is this is 1 year, and the disparity, if you like, between the loss of revenue and the departure fee, that will move around, and it could go the other way, from 1 year to the next. What you're saying is a relevant fact for the staff, LAFCO staff, and the commission to think. I was putting these sort of numbers out as a basis for thought. I wasn't. So what you're saying is correct. The disparity may go away, in another year or change. These are things to think of. I wouldn't tie the payment necessarily to 2022 thinking of nothing else. Or you could argue two ways. It's simpler to tie it to 2022, or we should be sort of monitoring it for each of several years. Those are decisions for the commission.
Okay, and then I have one last question, then I'm done. And it's probably a question more for Keen and LAFCO, but I guess it's sort of big picture now. You've got this report that describes challenges to the water authority that are not just attachment, but they're also roll off and revenue and expense imbalance. Is LAFCO, if you set a precedence in this process in terms of obligations a member agency takes on, is that inform your actions as you go through the MSR for the water authority that's planned? Since you have this report that identifies they're very similar.
The question specifically, the way I will answer it, does Dr. Hanneman's report inform topics that we will explore in our upcoming municipal service review on the water authority? Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Sandy, as a member agency, you've had your hand up, and why don't you go next?
Thank you, Adam. First, I just want to say thank you to Dr. Hanneman for your work and your diligence in gathering a lot of information and trying to make sure that you understand all perspectives. I have one question for you, and then I have a couple of comments that I would like to make. You made reference to general obligation bonds in your remarks today in the departure fee context. That is not in your report. And in fact, the Water Authority Act language is bonds and other indebtedness. And I assume, but would ask you to confirm you're not rendering any legal opinion about the GO bonds compared to other indebtedness.
No, I wasn't.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I appreciate the report very much. We think that it's appropriate to accept this report and move forward. I think that there are a number of other really important issues that have not been addressed yet. They're topics that we included on a list of issues to be discussed by the committee when it was originally formed. We shared our thoughts on these issues in our recent letter. And we know that other parties may have other questions and issues. And we would suggest scheduling a couple of sessions to go through those issues, not the least of which focus on the areas of voting rights, the loss of voting entitlement in San Diego, representation for Fallbrook and Rainbow in the Eastern Municipal Water District, along with the environmental issues and so forth. So we would hope that those could be taken up. I wanted to circle back to the discussion about roll-off or detachment. Those, I think, as you noted in your report, are two very different things. Roll-off is something that is planned over a long period of time. And as you say, a 10-year window to plan and adjust is certainly doable. Detachment is an immediate 7% reduction in revenues to the water authority, which also immediately impact all those local supply projects that are in development. When you have a window of time to plan for and anticipate changes, you can do that and you can adjust your revenue structure to deal with that. But an immediate blunt force of detachment is a much different animal than rolling off. Again, as you note in your report also, that when you roll off, you are still a member of the water authority and still have obligations for the expenses and the obligations of the agency. So I wanted to make that point. We agree with you that over a 10-year window of planning, we certainly could adjust. An immediate cutoff is a very different thing. I think in two other points I'd like to make, I see in your final analysis that basically with the differential between the MET rate and the water authority rate, the exit fee and the investments that MET is looking to make, and their most recent rate increase proposed at 8% and 9% for the next 2 years, essentially that differential dries up in terms of savings. And so I would just point that out, because as one of the huge premises of this, of saving money for the ratepayers in Fallbrook and Rainbow, that really lacks to be borne out in the report that you made. I would also say that I would just conclude with, I think that at this point, the LAFCO staff and the committee should be in a position to schedule our next steps and have conversation on the next issues and move forward. And again, appreciate all the time that you've put into this and look forward to moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Nick, I know you've had your hand up, but I'm going to go to Gary real quick since he says he's had to leave at 11:20. And Kim, if you could sit and hang tight while Gary concludes, I'll start with you on getting you on record for some sort of advisory vote of Michael Hanneman's completeness of his report. So Gary.
Nick, I appreciate it. I went ahead and adjusted my schedule. This is just so important that I will be able to stay through. So I'll defer to go, since Nick's had his hand up longer than me, I'll go after him. But I appreciate it, and I will stay through the entire meeting.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks, Gary. I appreciate that. I'll be quick here. Dr. Hanneman, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your tremendous effort here. It's been very, very extensive. Through our engagement with you at Eastern, we found that you've been very thorough, you've been very engaging. We've had a number of conversations, not just myself, but brought in our finance staff and our water resource planners to really get into the discussions and the issues. I just want to say from Eastern's perspective that we took this matter very seriously. right from the get-go, we brought our internal experts together to thoroughly assess Eastern's ability to reliably supply Fallbrook-Rainbow. Dr. Hanneman, as you know, we prepared what we thought was a very complete and thorough technical memorandum, which was the topic of a lot of conversation between us and you. And our conclusion was through that TM, looking at current and future demands throughout Eastern service area. In addition with Fallbrook-Rainbow, we came to the conclusion that we can 100% reliably supply Fallbrook-Rainbow. I know that our staff and yourself, we've had differences of opinions and perspectives on that, but I do want to say that we took it seriously. We looked at it thoroughly. We reviewed it a number of times, and we stand by our technical memorandum. We are very confident that Eastern is in a position to meet Fallbrook-Rainbow's needs going forward. With that, I also want to say that besides water supply reliability, there's obviously the rate impacts issue. There's the exit fee. These are not matters that Eastern felt it was our purview to look at. We are a Riverside County agency. This is a matter amongst San Diego County Water Authority, its member agencies, and other San Diego County water agencies. So really don't have a position or an opinion on that, as well as potentially some of these other aspects as far as of voting rights, where and how that gets done. I can't see that Eastern Municipal Water District is going to weigh in on that. With regards to one final thing, with regards to water supply reliability, when we looked at it strictly from the perspective of Eastern's ability to supply Fallbrook-Rainbow. We have not done an analysis or delved into who is more reliable, Eastern or San Diego County Water Authority. I think that was the question that was posed to Dr. Hanneman right from the get-go. And he may come to conclusions with regards to who is more reliable. We feel that if we can confidently and 100% reliably supply Fallbrook-Rainbow, more than 100% is really irrelevant at that point. So I just wanted to share those thoughts and again conclude with the appreciation for the work of this committee. Everybody's taking it very seriously, and Dr. Hanneman has really put the effort in from our perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
Gary, you still have your hand up. Do you have any Q&A, Dr. Hanneman?
Absolutely. And first, just like everybody else, thank you, Dr. Hanneman. Not only have I benefited from your report, but listening to you talk, the chairman of the San Diego County Water and within the Otay Water District, have been very active in water since about 2020, and prior to that, through being a firefighter for 35 years. So I do appreciate your comment about sometimes it's like fighting fires, because now you're talking my language, and I can better jump in at that point, but I do appreciate it. So thank you. I know that you've been put in a tough situation where you're trying to work out middle ground all the way through up to and including with the including or not including desal. Obviously, I have my opinion within the report in regards to the desal being included due to the fact that not only was Rainbow one of the initial 9 agencies that had a direct contract with Poseidon, and their board president at the time testifying to the Water Quality Control Board, asking that the desal permits be pushed through quickly because Rainbow needed that to go through as well. And then knowing that the other benefits that desal brings to the region as a whole, whether it be economic benefits, whether it be the reduction of some of the greenhouse gases, which I know that some have said has increased, but from the reports that I've read through the mitigation portions of it, that we've actually reduced the quantity of electricity and which has impacted greenhouse gases, because it takes less, as efficient as that desal plant is with newer technology, it's more efficient than transporting the water down through the state water project. within that reduction, there is a reduction in greenhouse gases that the entire county benefited once again. So I think that's where I disagree, but it's just a comment, not meant to be challenging of the report. It's just one of the things that I think could have been used in it. As the Water Authority, we do look at the regional things, but like I said, I really appreciate your points within it. There's the efforts, and I think Director Kennedy had made a comment in regards to efforts to come up with something mutually agreeable between the Water Authority and the member agencies trying to leave the regional component of San Diego County. And I think the portions of that where you said you were trying to come to middle ground versus us trying to come up with something, I think one of the other tasks which will fall outside of this is going to be other alternatives to the process. And I know that you weren't brought in specifically as one of the 3 items for alternatives, but as we move forward, because you've shown how professional you are, and bringing in somebody like you to maybe help share some of what the alternatives may or may not be, depending upon what LAFCO's overall consideration would that be, because I know that's one of the other tasks that the commission had looked to us for, was alternatives. So with that, thank you. I appreciate it. Lots of different things, whether it be through the MOUs with Eastern, some of the rest, I think that will fall outside of your report unless you're brought back in for additional information, which is always comforting. So I just wanted to make sure I took a moment in regards to the desal, but also to be able to thank you. The last one is specific to this report. As we look at it from different agencies, it's even as the report is written pretty clearly, Rainbow disagrees with some of it, Fallbrook disagrees with some of it, the Water Authority disagrees with some of it, but overall, very well written report. And because everybody likes to, including CWA, likes to say what your report means versus you being able to answer it for yourself, I hope when we get to the point where we give the presentation to the full commission, that it's considered that you're brought in to be able to answer questions specific to your report, should it be required, because there's nobody that can answer this better than coming directly from you. You show a level of professionalism. Your knowledge is just absolutely incredible, but it recognizes your efforts and your passion for water, period. And I think when people hear you speak versus somebody speak for you, it creates a whole different picture, and it's much clearer, and it's very obvious that you're coming from an independent side of things, from a professional that has been involved for many years, including your recent report that came out, or where you were quoted as recent as yesterday on CNN on some of your different things. So for me, getting to know you has been nice. The absolute amazing things when it comes to seeing where you're involved from the water side of things, and I'm proud to say that you've been involved in this project. We picked the right person, no doubt. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say I have benefited enormously from being able to work with you, for the Authority, Rainbow, Fallbrook, Eastern, and other members. So it really has been my great pleasure.
Kim, 11:21. I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries. I'll be brief. So I attended the LAFCO meeting over a year and a half ago when Chair Jacob referred it to this committee. And one of the things I remember is that she made it clear that the parties should continue to talk, and that hoped that this process would bring the parties together. So I do agree with Chair Croucher. I do hope that continues. Today, though, we're talking about the 3 topics that we came up with, right? And we retained Dr. Hanneman to answer those. We now have a report from Dr. Hanneman. We have a long record of letters that the parties have written past each other, some of them as recently this morning. I can't say I'm in 100% agreement with everything in the report. As Dr. Hanneman himself indicates, there's a lot of middle ground for judgment calls. But I do agree, there is sufficient information, there is informed analysis in the report for LAFCO to consider on the 3 topics. I do agree that Dr. Hanneman has satisfied his obligation to us on the 3 questions. I don't agree with this committee taking up legalities. We have letters from lawyers on both sides. I agree with Alex as he spoke this morning that legal questions are not within the purview of this committee. And I do believe legal matters need to be referred to legal counsel, LAFCO counsel, for consideration. But to answer your specific question, Adam, yeah, there is enough information in this report on the questions of reliability, ratepayer impacts, and a potential exit fee. So that's my position, and it's 11:22.
Is that a motion, Kim?
I mean, I don't know, are they asking for a motion today, or is this each person giving their?
We're not
their
asking for a general motion. We'd like to get everybody individually on the record. And I think you eloquently put your comments, questions, and concerns, rightfully so, as I expect from everybody. So
Okay.
you were a great lead in doing that and a great example. So I will kind of just go down the line of every committee member, and if they could make comments as such and accordingly to their own belief, as you did for yourself. That's the goal here.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Kim. So with that said, we'll just, Brian Albright, you said you always go first with your last name. So if I could maybe kick it off over to you and follow Kim's lead to any approval of Dr. Hanneman's duties and responsibilities and roles, and any other comments that you may see fit.
Sure. Thank you, Adam. I guess my summary statement would be I'm in agreement with Ms. Thorner. I'll just say, I appreciate LAFCO Council's actually guidance at the beginning with respect to our role as advising LAFCO staff and not directly the commission. Appreciate that clarification. In this process, I think I represent the county at large. And so I've tried to take a sort of a regional perspective. The county is a customer of Fallbrook and Rainbow, and I think every single one of the other county water authority member agencies, right? So I come at it from a slightly different maybe perspective than several of the other ad hoc committee members. With respect to Dr. Hanneman's report, there's some heady stuff in there that for a non-water expert like me, I found challenging at times. So I probably had to spend a lot more time and reading through it multiple times compared to many of you. But having done so, I found it to be comprehensive, fair, and unbiased, in my opinion. I will say, there's a lot of information that's come in yesterday, the day before. I have not had time to thoroughly review that information, some of which I understand challenges some of the information in the report. For me, it's become clear the more that we have discussed this case that the present challenge and the present case that we're evaluating, really is going to impact the future of the county water authority and development of water supplies for other individual member agencies. So, I'm looking at this and thinking this has some implications for beyond whatever the decision and action is that's taken with respect to this departure. And that's something that I don't know where it'll go or how that will be dealt with, but that's to me, one of the larger elephants in the room that I think is worthy of consideration. And Dr. Hanneman, I appreciate your comments. You called it a broken model. That's what I was thinking. I didn't want to say it, but since you did, I'm just going to say I see it the same way. And I appreciate your report. And for the record, I agree that you've sort of satisfied your obligations and your requirements. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. And in no preference of order, I'm just going to go through the committee list that I've got. So Jack, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. Yeah, so I appreciate it. And I agree with Kim that, the information's there with the report, our comments. Obviously, it's up to LAFCO to kind of look at our comments compared to the report and make some decisions. I think, Dr. Hanneman's done what he was asked to do, and it's time to kind of move past that. Just sort of as a reminder for everyone, Fallbrook and Rainbow are paying for this entire process, right? And do Fallbrook and Rainbow need to solve all the issues with water in Southern California is the other question that I think is in front of this committee. And the reality is, although I think they're great and important issues, the reason this started was because we have some real challenges, and that's laid out in the next item in the MSR. Our ratepayers in Fallbrook and Rainbow, and Brian knows this because he deals with us up in Fallbrook all the time, have some challenges in terms of not just in our community, but also driven by cost of water, loss of agriculture. So, I'd like to see this move forward because we need a path one way or the other, right? If we're gonna have to raise rates 7 to 8% a year going forward, great. If LAFCO is gonna set an exit fee that is half of my cost of water, great, because that's going to change, that's going to make this process unviable. If the water authority is sort of the Hotel California of water agencies that you can't leave, and that's what that language in the Water Authority Act was really meant to say is, once you're in, and there's really no way out, and that's LAFCO's determination, then great, let's get that figured out, because that'll drive the decision. So, why I appreciate this and why there's this idea of, well, let's talk about, these peripheral issues of Met's voting rights, how we're represented at Eastern, which is really a Fallbrook issue, not a Water Authority issue, how we're represented at Eastern. And 0.2% at Met is that, the future of Southern California after what Dr. Hanneman just laid out, all these challenges we have. Our strategy in San Diego County is to win votes by 0.2% at Met. Nothing's going to get solved. And so I think, the main issues resolved by the report, trying to move that forward. If there are real alternatives that the Water Authority has proposed, let's hear what those are, because what came out of the meetings with them is they would help us get grants and loans for our infrastructure. That was the proposal by the Water Authority, and we have people to do that. So, I appreciate this, but I'm really hopeful that we can move this process along. It costs us money the longer this drags out, just to pay the cost for all of this, and eventually we have to have a plan one way or another. So appreciate it. And my end result is I'm good with the the report with our comments, and happy to move this along however we can. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Nick Canetis, do you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. And again, just not to repeat what I said before, but with a focus on water supply reliability, I think Dr. Hanneman has done a thorough job in his analysis, his assessment. As I said, I think there's differing perspectives, understanding, and opinions, but I think he's fleshed out all the information, and I believe with regards to the water supply reliability aspect of his report, he's completed his assignment there, and the report is done and ready to move on.
Thank you, Nick. Tom Kennedy.
Yeah, I agree that Dr. Hanneman has completed his duties, not only because we don't want to write any more checks, but I think the report, and there's no further information. There's a body of information here, ample for the LAFCO staff, because so Carol and Priscilla can dig into all of it and help Keen in the preparation of the report. I think that, there's not a heck of a lot more to give that won't just be letters going back and forth. So I don't think that's that productive. So I do think that we should wrap up this portion of this ad hoc committee's work, and that we should resist the attempt to add more and more scope to this, because I don't think that's going to add to the work of the staff at LAFCO. If any particular interested party has particular topics they would like to bring up, they can send them into LAFCO just like everyone does for every other process at LAFCO, as opposed to dragging on this particular committee. So with that, I'll cede to the next person.
Thanks, Tom. Lydia Romero.
Hi, Adam. Sorry about that. I have to keep my camera off because our Wi-Fi here at the city is really bad. So I have to say, I have to echo some of Brian Albright's comments as a non-water person. This was a topic that I had to catch up really fast and spent multiple times reading not only the draft report from Dr. Henneman, but the actual report from Dr. Henneman. And I'd have to say, with all of you, I had a tremendous learning curve over the last 18 months. So thank you very much. But to get to the crux of the issue, I think the report was very thorough, concise, and understandable based on the information available. This was an informed analysis, and the tasks that were required that we had tasked Dr. Henneman with, I think were responded to. This issue is a very difficult one, and threading that needle, I think was accomplished and gives LAFCO staff the information they need to work with all entities to make an informed decision and recommendation to the LAFCO staff. I think being one of the few non-water individuals on this call, I think our committee work is done. We had very specific tasks, and I think those tasks have been complete. And I think the rest of the information needs to actually go to the LAFCO board and allow those experts to have a say on what the next steps are. So thank you all.
Thank you, Lydia. Thank you. Sandy?
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to comment. I agree that the report is completed. I think, as was said by my chair, each of us has a little bit different take on some of the information in the report and not 100% happy. So that must mean you got it right, Dr. Hanneman, is that we share that across the board. I would just add that this is an unprecedented action in the state of California, and it is complicated. And so I do appreciate all of the committee members and the time and the effort that's been spent on this. And this is really going to be a foundational action, whichever way it goes, for water planning in the state of California. To Jack's comment about the voting rights, I don't know if Jack hasn't been watching Met meetings, but a lot of those issues at Met gets decided on a very thin margin. It's unfortunate, but it does. And as Rainbow and Fallbrook area grows in assessed valuation, that percentage vote value changes and will increase over time. So these are material to the benefit of this region and what our ratepayers are going to pay out of the things that Met's doing and the big investments that they're about to make. And as evidenced by their latest proposed rate increases, which are just for status quo budget, they don't include any new investments in supply reliability going forward. I respectfully disagree with the last comment that this committee has finished its work. There was quite a bit of work assigned to this committee from the LAFCO Commission, which has not been completed. And I would hope that this process would continue so we can get through those issues, provide information to the staff, which they then can share at LAFCO. But to the specific point, I am ready to accept the report and move on to the next items.
Thank you, Sandy. Nick Serrano, City of San Diego.
Thank you, Adam. I would say in terms of the Dr. Hanneman's report, job well done, mission accomplished. I think he accomplished exactly what we asked him to set out to do. So I would support accepting Dr. Hanneman's report. And, as I mentioned, and to not repeat my earlier comments too much, but the city certainly believes, and I think this discussion highlights that there's more items that this committee should consider. As I said, specifically roll-off versus detachment and the impacts to the city of San Diego, some of the impacts to ratepayers, which includes affordability and also voting rights. Again, I just think this is a significant decision that will come before LAFCO. And so I do think that just from a pure good governance perspective, a thorough vetting and discussion of these items and some others are probably necessary. And so we would certainly ask as the city that this be explored by this committee and we would make ourselves available to determine how best to do that. But again, Dr. Hanneman, thank you. You deserve a vacation, and job well done. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. And I think the last one is Keith. So Keith, you missed my introduction to the committees as you're the newest member here. So I let everybody know that you read all the material in the last year and a half in the last week. So with that being said, I'll just give you the opportunity to weigh in with the very short time that you've already served and kind of try to catch up to speed on what I guess little that you may know of what we've worked on. But do you have any comments or anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, it's a unique perspective for me to come into a 16-month process in the last week and kind of when everything's coming to a head. I can give a little perspective. First of all, I'm Keith Greer. I'm the manager for environmental planning here at Sandag. I've been here for 15 years. Before that, I was at the city of San Diego for 15. So while I'm not an expert in water, I know government and I know how government works. And let me give you a perspective on Dr. Hanneman's report for just using your own words, committee members. It was thorough, comprehensive, concise. He was engaging, willing to listen to others, make changes when he agreed, and he was regarded as a highly professional. So it seemed like a love fest listening to this as an outsider for Dr. Hanneman. So if I'm using your own words, it seems like there's nothing missing from his report. I didn't hear anything today that said he's missed a whole section. It seems like the report itself did what it set out to do. There may be technical disagreements, and I would suggest that if there are technical disagreements that appended to his reports or as part of LAFCO's reports, you know, the members who think it's technically other viewpoints put their into an appendix or some kind of addendum to the report. But I think I've not heard anything today or read anything in the report that something big was missing. So with that regards, I think now it goes into the more, I think, heaty issue of what does that mean? And this is a big issue, and it's an issue for us both in the regional and the state about what does it mean to leave a water agency. That's all I have to say today, and thank you very much, and I look forward to our meetings.
Thank you, Keith. Really appreciate the comments, and thank you for joining us and participating in our efforts. So I think I included everybody here. I don't think I missed anybody unless noted otherwise, but oh, Gary, there you are.
Oh, it's all good. I just didn't jump in to show my support. The one thing I would have just, and it has to do with water reliability, lots of different things that could be said. So what I will do is I will focus purely on the question at hand, and has Dr. Hanneman met the needs and met what we requested him to do? And I'll keep it nice, short, and simple. Absolutely. He addressed the three issues. He addressed them regardless of whose opinion was where. He did it independently. And kudos to Dr. Hanneman. And I say absolutely he met the conditions or the expectations that we gave him.
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate being concise there. Okay, I think that concludes all 10 committee members. Thank you for those comments. Really, really appreciate it. Before we move on, I do want to check with Tammy just to make sure that there is no pre-provided or current members of the public that have anything they wish to say or participate in today's item.
No, I received no speaker slips in regards to this item.
Thank you, Tammy. And I will end this by saying, I know there was a lot of peripherals and a lot of comments to where this ad hoc committee will head to next. I think we can have some sort of more of a further conversation on the next couple items ahead of us with the future calendar and future agenda items, as Alex noted at the beginning of this meeting. So with that said, Dr. Hanneman, thank you so much for everything that you've done, and we appreciate your work and participation.
Thank you. I will leave you now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adam, let me just jump in. And Dr. Hanneman, I know that you just left, but I very much appreciate his work. So I think looking at the agenda, I think maybe Priscilla can concise down her presentation as best she can. But I think we are going to go over 12 o'clock. And so maybe just get a handle on people's availability to maybe stretch out to with a commitment that, you know, we get done with the MSR at 12, and then from 12 to maybe 12:15, we talk about the rest of the agenda, if that's doable.
Is there any objections to that from any committee members with an advised schedule with today's meeting wrapping up about 12:15, 12:20? Okay, having seen none, we will proceed. So we will move on to item 5. Is it B? No, sorry, 5C, which is the Fallbrook Region Municipal Service Review Report. This advisory committee will receive an update from LAFCO analyst Priscilla Allen on the current municipal service review for the Fallbrook-Rainbow region and its associated review with the reorganization proposals. This information is informational only, and so Priscilla, take us away.
Thank you so much, Adam. So I'm going to have a quick presentation here. I'm going to shorten it up for you all. But yes, Priscilla Allen, analyst with San Diego LAFCO. Du's pulling up a PowerPoint presentation for me here as I begin. But as you all know, we've been working on this municipal service review, and it focuses in on 4 local governmental agencies within the Fallbrook region. And then being the 2 that we've been talking about today, so Fallbrook Public Utility District and Rainbow Municipal Water District, and then 2 others being North County Fire Protection District and County Service Area number 81, which is Fallbrook Local Parks. Next slide, please. So this MSR is an opportunity for LAFCO to independently evaluate services with 3 outcomes in mind. So providing an informational resource to the general public, inform our associated task in updating spheres of influence for each of the affected agencies, and then also possibly, whether directly or indirectly, produce boundary changes and or other local governmental changes like creating or consolidating special districts. Next slide, please. So I'm going to quickly highlight each agency, or maybe concise. So the first one to be formed was Fallbrook Public Utility District in June 1922, the last being North County Fire Protection District in January 1987. They have populations that vary, the smallest being Rainbow, servicing 22,130 residents, and North County Fire Protection District servicing 53,000 residents. Next slide, please. They have overlapping boundaries, Fallbrook Public Utility District being the smallest, spanning 44 square miles, and then CSA 81 being the largest and spanning about 122 square miles. And so I'll move on to our key conclusions and recommendations. And so on the next slide, you see we have 9 key conclusions, and they're written up in short form, and I'll just quickly go through them. So number 1, this was an introductory municipal service review where the agencies and the constituents within the region were getting to know this relatively unfamiliar planning process. But then also we were introducing our commission to each of the affected agencies and their service functions at depths that we previously had not visited. Number 2, that the region has slowly and steadily consolidated their local government, going from 8 agencies to 4 agencies. We also learned that avocados have had a huge influence in the region and have influenced that mostly rural character. And then irrespective of the influence that avocados have had in the region, it's reasonable to assume that some level of substantive growth and development will occur within the region, as that ties to housing demand as well as transportation corridors in the region, and then also the available land supply. We also learned that Fallbrook has distinguishing gray, green, and blue collar demographics. And then as we focus in on each of the agencies, so each of them have adequate and excess municipal service capacities, though they do seem to have some stress testing underway within their finances. And there's this unknown case of incorporation in Fallbrook where there's been reoccurring interest. However, right now, there are the 3 reorganizations that are on top of mind for the locals, and then being the 2 that we focused in on today, the detachment from San Diego County Water Authority, but then also separately the reorganization proposal by Fallbrook Public Utility District and seeking to activate latent powers such as street lighting, parks and recreation. And so then moving on to our recommendations, they total 15, but I'm going to focus in on 3. So number first and number 2, the estimated loss of nearly 1/5 of avocado acreage should be further explored. And right now we have been provided with a grant through the Department of Conservation, which is a 2-year planning grant that we're working on with the RCD of Greater San Diego County. And so we're hoping to focus in on the region through that grant. And then number 9, that there may be opportunities for additional consolidations within the Fallbrook region. However, right now that doesn't seem to be imminent or otherwise merit initiation by us at this time. And lastly, number 13, San Diego LAFCO should proceed in updating and affirming with no changes the spheres of influence for Fallbrook-Rainbow and CSA 81, with Lone Wolf being North County Fire Protection District. And so this completes my presentation of the final report. I want to thank Tom and Jack, who are on the call today, and their staff, as well as the other agencies for all of their help throughout this process. But I'm going to kick it back to Adam, and I'm ready to answer any questions.
Thank you, Priscilla. Appreciate you shortening that down for us with respect to our time. And
yeah, and Adam, this is key. I just want to say, so outstanding job by Priscilla in preparing what is a very large and material document on the fly, taking what was, I think I asked Priscilla to do a 20-minute or so presentation, and then on the fly, getting it down to 3 minutes. And then I don't know if anyone else knows this, but there is construction at the LAFCO office. Priscilla is able to do this without stopping to deal with this jackhammering that some of you may be hearing in the background. So thank you, Priscilla. And Adam, I'll lead it to you to see if there's any questions or comments.
Certainly, I will certainly open up the discussion for our committee. And it looks like Sandy, you have your hand up. So if you want to lead off.
Yes, thank you. And Keen, I would echo your comments. Priscilla, really great job. We face that at the Water Authority board meetings where things get jammed up and 30-minute presentations go to 3. So great job. Just a couple of comments I'd like to make. We think it's important that the Hanneman report be attached to the MSR and being provided to the commission, since it does report on issues included in the MSR. I would also note that there's talk in the MSR about increasing urbanization, and I think this should be discussed, including the impacts of increased land valuation in the service areas, which will directly affect MWD voting rights in the future, impacts of separating land use decisions that stay with SANDAG and water supply planning assessment decisions for development that may be made by Riverside County Agency. We also note that some other points on the MSR in the correspondence that we provided and that was provided to this group, and note that there is some inconsistency on data that we think LAFCO should take a look at with regard to population. We will provide a formal comment to the LAFCO Commission following our discussion for their consideration when this goes back to them in March. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Jack?
Yeah, just to clarify, because I'm a little confused. So the MSR is a snapshot in time through 2020, correct? I mean, is that sort of the intent of the MSR, is to capture sort of that snapshot in time? It seems like these issues related to detachment and water supply reliability in the future will be addressed as part of the process in the application for detachment. So it seems like we're in a do loop on the MSR, and I'm just giving everyone a heads up. You know, there was an application for Parks and Recreation that's sitting out there. There's a pretty substantial active group in the community that is waiting on that and has been patient, but is getting less patient. And just to give everyone's a heads up, until the MSR gets acted on, that cannot be acted on. You're likely to start to hear from those people, the commissioners and others. So I'm just giving everyone a heads up. I understand the Water Authority's goal to sort of make this take as long as it can, but I think those issues can get addressed as part of the application for detachment, and the need to hold up an MSR for a time period in which we were members of the Water Authority really doesn't make a ton of sense, except we're just wasting people's time. And at the end of it, also very well done document by Priscilla on an MSR. I mean, this very well done MSR. So I just want to thank them for their effort. And for the Water Authority side, the MSR has been out there for an incredibly long time. And so, there were comments that could have happened along the way instead of, right before. And there was a draft Hanneman report. So the idea was tied to the final Hanneman report. There was a draft one out there if there was a concern that somehow findings about some potential future change in water suppliers needs to go in an MSR from a time period in the past, that could have gotten addressed early in the process. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Gary Croucher?
Yeah, and I appreciate Jack's comments. Unfortunately for him, the LAPCO Commission disagreed with his thoughts and put it on to today's agenda with us. So luckily, as we move forward as well, there may be pop shots taken out there in regards to the Water Authority's agenda in regards to taking it as long as it can, being lazy, bully, those kind of things. I think we've tried to get away from that, but obviously, Jack, you feel you need to go back to that. It's very unfortunate. I think we need to stay professional, we need to stay focused, and we need to move forward as appropriate. The different things within the MSR that ties in to the others is they were supposed to go parallel together from my understanding and the understanding of the commission and from LAPSCO staff as far as I'm aware. So luckily we're doing that. In particular to the MSR, some of the questions that I had, does it address some of the current conditions within that snapshot of current challenges? For example, this would be one, I know one of Rainbow's current challenges sits that they had their water meters that were over 7% inaccurate, and that they were losing out in their report anyways, in excess of $1.6 million a year within the inaccurate water meters. Did it, with the snapshot within that, did it take those kind of things into consideration? And then also with the portion of it that refers to the financial issues, I know that within that, it says that we should maybe look at, review it again in 5 years to consider if it's still an issue. With that, rather than waiting for 5 years and then saying that you can't look back 5 years because it's only taken a snapshot of current conditions, what if rather than waiting another 5 years, what if we were to take the snapshot like we did and to see if it's a trend rather than waiting 5 years, look at the past 5 years and see if the past 5 years is consistent with what you saw or what you're concerned about now? And is there a recognized trend? Otherwise, in 5 years from now, when you take it, you'd be saying, if it is the same issues, you would be saying, once again, you need to go 5 years out to the future again. So like I said, when you raise some concerns, when do you explore that beyond the timeline that we're currently at? So I think there's a couple questions in there, and I think that the snapshot in the current time, there's the different urban water management plans that those plans planned not only into this 5-year snapshot, but then the future plans as well. So I think if we take a look at the urban water management plans as far as the future of those agencies and where they were hoping to go versus where they got to during this 5-year snapshot, and then currently where they're hoping to go to in the future, I think it's key and helpful, not only when it comes to infrastructure maintenance and replacement, but then also future supplies, and within some of those where they've been successful at where they're hoping to go as far as independent local supplies and some of the rest. And I think within that, and it's where the municipal service review goes, along with parallel with Dr. Hanneman's report, or really the separation from the two agencies wanting to get out of the water portion of the San Diego region and be more aligned with Riverside. Within that, there's a couple different things that I think is important to be able to recognize. And one of them is, and it was a statement by one of my colleagues, and it talks about some of the things that we've been working on. And it says, the statement was, the reality of the situation in San Diego County is that we have worked for 2 decades to diversify our supplies so that we could withstand droughts. Our efforts have worked, and we really have available supplies with a good deal that from sources unrelated to California's hydrology. San Diego should serve as an example statewide of how a region should plan for these sorts of water shortages. So I think the snapshot shows that. Have we been successful in that, including Rainbow and Fallbrook, specific to that? Because that statement, as we talk about the different planning and the planning that we're talking about within the service municipal reviews to ensure that our water agencies have that reliable water that we talk about, those comments that I just read didn't come from me, but it was from the words of the general manager of Rainbow, Tom Kennedy, in his letter to the chair of the State Water Resources Control Board in April of 2015. So I think some of those different things that were said then versus what is being said now is important when you look at the snapshots in time and try not to erase history, but acknowledge history and how it affects our current planning and our current situation. Because while a snapshot in time, it's also the overall conditions that we currently sit at. So those are my comments.
Thank you, Gary. Tom?
All right, hard to follow that one. So I also want to thank Priscilla for all the work that she did and some of her predecessors. This one's been going on. I think Robert was working on this one a couple of years back, and it's great that it's done. I do appreciate that Mr. Croucher is so concerned about Rainbow's water meters, and I want to let you know that we are at 99% complete replacing all of our meters. So if that's a big concern to you, I hope that stills your heart a little bit. I think that it's important for the people on this committee to understand, and I don't want to take Keen's thunder, but maybe I'll put my LAFCO hat on for a little while, and consider that municipal service reviews are a function that LAFCO is required to do under the law every 5 years. It's not something that they choose to do this year or that year. And Priscilla and Carol and the rest of the gang at LAFCO have a huge list in front of them that the commission votes on every year as to how to prioritize these. And so it's intended to look at a 5-year spans. And so it's not something that is normally taken out of cycle, and it is independent of other applications that come in. And these are done on a routine basis, month after month they come through, and they are not something that is generally conflated with other applications. Sometimes through the process of municipal service review, LAFCO will identify changes in spheres and other actions that may need to be addressed as that process goes, and LAFCO will take such actions as appropriate. In this situation, the municipal service review, as Jack indicated, is reflective of the 5-year period from 2015 to 2020, if I have that right, Priscilla. And it's not instructive to the detachment, except for the clear and indisputable fact that the cost of water is making farming very hard. And in my service area, where over 60% of our water is for agriculture, we're losing a lot of acreage. And this entire detachment process is really to make sure that we can remain economically viable. So I support and have supported and have given lots of feedback to the staff over the months on the MSR, and we look forward to going to the March meeting and having the commission approve it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Gary, do you have anything more to say, or is your hand just up? And
now, just one question in regards to, I know when you have the annexation attachments or detachments with it, it requires that you do MSR. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. But with requiring to do that, knowing that Rainbow and Fallbrook are not changing their service areas, we're only looking at changing the service area of the CWA and the service area of Eastern with the Riverside. Will it require that the service review done, municipal service review be done within the County Water Authority and within the Eastern portion of it? And is that going to be LAFCO East or Riverside LAFCO's responsibility, or will San Diego LAFCO follow with that, or what is just the process? So I'm aware.
Thank you, Gary. So I'll jump in, King Simon. So with respect to the reorganizations, the LAFCO staff is on the hook to prepare a MSR document specific to Eastern Municipal Water District, given its boundary is proposed to go further south into Fallbrook and Rainbow. That document will be its own addendum to a Riverside LAFCO MSR that is already on the books, and we are coordinating with Riverside LAFCO on that process. And we do, and we will present that as part of the reorganization proposals that go to the commission.
Okay, and then the review of CWA.
The review of CWA is scheduled, but is not impacted by the reorganization proposals on file. We have a CWA municipal service review scheduled, I think, in 4 years. Under LAFCO law, there is no nexus between a potential detachment and an MSR. The focus is on the receiving agencies.
Awesome. And the last one would be, are we looking at, is their applications put in to be annexed into Eastern, or is it just to annex into the sphere of influence of Eastern? Because I think there's a difference between the two. And I just, like I said, I'm just trying to understand, not trying to argue on one point or the other, just trying to argue, just trying to understand better for my purposes.
No, it's a fair question, Gary. It's a twofer. So for Eastern Municipal Water District, Nick and his water district brethren there, not only do they need to annex Fallbrook and Rainbow's physical territory, but in order to do that, a sphere of influence amendment is required. And that is certainly the thinking as to why we are doing what I call an addendum MSR for Eastern Municipal Water District with the help of Riverside LAFCO.
Thank you. And I know I had requested to meet with you, and maybe at some point we're able to move forward to that. I know there's challenges because of that, but at some point, even if we meet, and I know you've met with Tom, you've met with Jack, I think you were able to meet recently with Adele. Or if not, hopefully you're able to do that soon. You've been able to meet with Sandy and others. I've been involved in different aspects of special districts in different ways, and I'd love to, even if we decide we're not going to talk about specifically the MSR or the detachment, at least meeting with you to get to know each other a little bit. So thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Gary.
Any other committee members have anything more to say or contribute to this item? Okay. Having seen none, I will quickly check with Tammy to verify if there's any members of the public that have provided any pre-comments or are currently participating and wish to speak.
I didn't receive any pre-registered comments. You can check in with Erica.
No live comments.
Thank you. Okay, that concludes item 5C. Trying to wrap this up in the next 10 minutes. We will
Adam, if I could just interject, Priscilla, how do you want to handle comments off dais? If there's any members here or the public who want to comment on the MSR, can you give some quick instructions?
Yes, so any comments that you'd like to provide, please do so, whether emailing me directly or through our website. And we will accept these comments through March 15th, keeping in mind that anything provided before March 6th, which would be the day before our March 7th commission meeting, those will be provided as part of supplementary correspondence to our commission. So
and the idea there, committee members, we have already briefed our commission on the idea that an addendum to this MSR may be in play based on comments that this committee ultimately provides us as a whole or as individual members. LAFCO staff will decide the merits of what would go into an addendum, and that addendum may be produced after the commission acts on the MSR document on March 7th, but presumably before we would take action on the reorganization proposals down the line. So with that, thank you, Adam. And thank you again, Priscilla.
Thank you, Keen. Thank you, Priscilla. We'll move on to item 5D and 5E. I want to take these together because I think they essentially rely on one another, and both ask the question, where does this committee go next, which has been asked in today's hearing from a few members of the committee, and also in written communication from prior agencies. So I would, I think it's quite obvious and it's safe to say that we have continue to have a number of members say that this committee is completed, and some members saying that they would like to tackle a host of topics and move forward accordingly. From our perspective, it's fair and reasonable to conclude that this committee has exhausted its duty for multiple reasons I could detail later if you wish, but it's now time for us to pass the baton to LAFCO staff to start the review. It's not to say that we want to ignore any of the peripheral issues or other issues that have been highlighted or brought to our attention. Those issues that have been noted in writing and in today's meetings and comments from a few of the members, LAFCO staff will be preparing their report. And I think that report will aim to address most, if not all, of those issues. It is then our expectation that we would reconvene this ad hoc committee one last time to give them an opportunity to review LAFCO's final report before it goes to the LAFCO commission. And at that time and accordingly, this committee can provide any recommendations as they see fit for the LAFCO commission to consider. So I'll open the floor to kind of retouch on some of the comments that we've already had, but that's kind of our interpretation of where we go next with this ad hoc committee meeting, convening one more time. And I'll open it up for any questions or discussion with the members. So Gary, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and put my questions in writing, or I'll look at maybe with you. Some might be simple questions that are able to just be 1 or 2 word replies back, but I think there's some additional questions that go along with what alternatives did we come up with, what some of the different things are out there, what some of the things were in it was the intent when I asked back in October and November that some of those things would be hopefully addressed when I sat down with Keen and go from there. But knowing where we're at right now and trying to look to where we're going, I'll put those, well, I'll call you, Adam. You might be able to supply some of those answers. If not, I'll throw the other answer or other questions into writing so you can bring them to LAFCO staff and yourself and maybe answer them, but otherwise you may deem it's necessary to bring it back to the committee. Some of the answers that you come up with, I think, would be beneficial to all committee members that as we work through learning new things each and every day. While I've been in water for quite some time now, just like anything else in life, you learn something new every day. So we'll take that and look at it as an opportunity to share some of the questions, and hopefully that will answer some others as well. And then hopefully others will share their questions and I'll benefit from them too. So I am going to jump off the call here shortly. I know Sandy and some of the others will remain and continue with some of the items, but I look forward to meeting with you very soon and getting those to you in a very timely manner so that it doesn't slow things down in a way that it could benefit everybody within the knowledge that's shared. So thank you.
Thank you, Gary. That's much appreciated, and I would encourage any and all parties to do the same. Nick?
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think I've made comments today about what the city is looking for and to have contemplated. I would just ask what is, based off what you just said, and I'm going to try and restate, then you correct me if I'm wrong. So you're anticipating there's going to be just one more meeting of this ad hoc committee?
Correct.
And then what is the timeline for that meeting to occur? And so I guess the timeline that LAFCO staff will need, and then for that meeting to have that final meeting to happen.
Keen, I'm going to have to defer to you on this one. Putting you on.
Well, I would say that it's reasonable to assume that if we were to have just one more ad hoc meeting, and against LAFCO staff is not opposed to holding more, but as Adam correctly noted, our baseline right now is that we would proceed with our administrative review, and that we would likely be in a position sometime in late summer to perhaps hold a meeting and present either a draft staff report or a near complete staff report. I will say, Nick, that your comments certainly have given me some thought about diving a little further into the roll-off versus departure. I accept your invitation that you commented earlier on about working with the city on understanding better the effects and impacts that the roll-off and the kind of formulas that Michael Hanneman's report has that could be applied to other member agencies like the city. So we've got some work to do here at LAFCO staff on just those topics. The question, I suppose, for the committee is, to what level beyond wanting to see LAFCO's staff report on the actual reorganization would you like to actively participate? Not to commit that we would agree with you, but we are open to the idea if we think it's constructive and in the spirit of the ad hoc's task to perhaps schedule more than just one more meeting.
Okay, I appreciate that openness. Again, I would just submit to you that, the city of San Diego, certainly would welcome more contemplation to not only the items that I mentioned, but just others as well. And so, I think you and I, Keen, can talk about what that looks like. I am definitely empathetic to those who have been part of this for 18 months. So I get it. But at the same time, just given that the decision that is in front of us, adding in, just a pure good governance perspective, I just don't want to be hasty again. And I say that to Fallbrook-Rainbow with respect, just from my end. Okay, thank you very much. And I think I will also ask that the city formally submit in writing what I have mentioned today, in addition to any other aspects that we hope will be contemplated in a LAFCO report.
Nick, thank you. And I that would be appreciative if you could get that on record and send that into us for our notes. Jack?
Yeah, thank you, Adam. And I know better than to argue with Mr. Serrano, but I am sort of hopeful that even if this committee doesn't meet, what it seems to me is this format hasn't been incredibly productive. Me and Gary seem to not get along very well in this format, and I'm not sure that's the case every other time we're together. And so it's sort of my hope is that, the parties can still talk with each other. And as we've said throughout this, Fallbrook and Rainbow are happy. We have different views, but we're still open to talk. And are there options, and what are those things? Our boards and us have said throughout, we're still open. So there may be another, way to keep talking, even though LAFCO is doing their work based on our application, which is a pretty defined role, and talk through some of these issues that involve, City of San Diego, the Water Authority, Fallbrook-Rainbow. So that's sort of my hope, and I support the idea that, you know, us getting together and talking past each other and writing letters past each other with, you know, Brian Albright stuck in the middle, maybe isn't the most productive path forward. So I support what sort of Adam laid out with the idea, understanding there's other issues that, you know, may need to get addressed along the way. So thanks.
Adam, if I just may, because just for everybody's benefit, if you just saw Jack and I on this forum, you would think that we were cutthroat enemies at it. We actually get along very well. We work together, and I don't want to make any mistake that I'm absolutely committed to working within the entire group. I just as Jack is passionate about Fallbrook, Tom is passionate about Rainbow. I am very passionate about the region and the region as a whole. So just want to make sure that nobody's getting the mistake that all of a sudden you've got two members on this committee that are just at each other's throats.
Thanks, Gary. Sandy?
Yeah, I just would like to interject that I think the parties just talking does not give the regional folks on this committee the opportunity to understand the really serious long-term impacts to the region as a lot losing voting power at MWD, what that means for the impact of the entire San Diego region. And I think it's critical that we get a meeting at least on that issues set to talk about that. I guess the other thing I would ask is what has changed? The commission had a list of duties for this committee to work on, and those have not been completed. And so I'm just trying to understand what has changed.
Keen, do you want to give your perspective? I can give my perspective.
So
how do you...
The committee or the commission tasked the ad hoc committee to help LAFCO staff in the administrative review. I had identified some topics in that agenda report on things the committee may weigh in on. It wasn't intended, Sandy, on my end that becomes scripture in terms of tasks to do. So through the ad hoc committee to date, the consensus has been, let's get a professional outside expert to tackle these weighty issues of water supply, rate impacts, and a potential departure fee. If the committee, all of you collectively say, we want to meet on this and this, I don't think I would be saying no to that. So I defer to the committee on if the consensus is let's continue to meet on specific topics, and this is part of the agenda item, then I think you'll have an affirmative response to staff.
Sandy, I think you're muted and you're commenting.
Thank you. I would like to just say, from my perspective, we do need to have another meeting on this issue. It has not been fleshed out. I'm not sure how the LAFCO staff has enough information to be able to form an opinion on this. And so I would recommend that topic alone needs to be the subject of another meeting.
Tom?
Well, right on the day that the lockdown happened in 2020, I dropped our application package off at the old LAFCO offices over on Hazard and put them at the doorstep and ran out of the building. So we're approaching a 2-year anniversary. And all during that time, our ratepayers are not receiving the benefit of what the benefits of attachment would be. So we've been at this for 2 years. And at some point, LAFCO needs to start their actual processing the application. All the county tax issues have been sorted out. All that other stuff has been done. The only thing holding up LAFCO staff from processing our applications is the continuing back and forth of this committee. And it's not super productive. Now, I recognize that some people have other issues they want to talk about. You want to talk about voting rights at Met. You want to talk about this grant, how it's going to destabilize the county. That's fine. I don't object to that. But the one problem I have is making this some sort of serial issue that the LAFCO staff, Priscilla, Carol, and Keen, can't get started until this committee winds itself up. If the applications can begin processing, and that you want to have some concurrent discussions on limited topics while the processing of the application is going on, I don't object to that. If, on the other hand, we want to hold up the staff from doing the work that they've been charged to do for almost 2 years now, and continue this seemingly endless discussion in this committee, I think it's a waste of all of our time, and the fact that it's costing our ratepayers a lot of money to process applications. We're going to do it for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars at this point. And so at some point, LAFCO needs to make a call on this thing. And while I appreciate that people want to talk about some minutia here and there and tie everybody up, and we can certainly do so, I also want to make sure that if such a decision is made, that it's done concurrent with the processing of the applications.
I want to be clear on something here, Adam, and Tom, I understand your position, but for the record, LAFCO staff is actively processing both proposals. We are concurrently working with the ad hoc committee on, to date, the 3 topics that were flagged for additional independent lenses through an at-large process, plus having affected members on the committee. I would not agree with the idea that the ad hoc is slowing us down. Not at all. The ad hoc is assisting LAFCO staff. The question for this group and in this committee or this agenda item today is, are there issues that, knowing that LAFCO has this long list that I think we shared with you on the first meeting of all the factors that have to be addressed in a reorganization proposal, are there any items that this committee wants to participate in the staff administrative review? That offer remains to all of you. LAFCO staff will certainly decide what we think has more merit than other. But I just wanted to make sure that the public watching understands we have value in this committee. The committee has already proved valuable with the Dr. Hanneman process. And I'll leave it there.
Keen, just to follow up on that, at what point do you think that you can make a determination to the completeness of our applications? Because the property tax exchange process has been completed many, many months ago. And so that's a statutory thing with this sort of reorganization application. And so I'm curious as to when you might anticipate that to occur.
End of summer.
So it'll be 30 months, okay?
And Keen, let me just add on to what you've just said, and maybe that's kind of whether I articulated it accurately or not. That's kind of what I was trying to tee up in the beginning with respect to all the committee members and their opinions on how we move forward, because obviously there's some factions on both sides of the aisle here. But it seems appropriate that everybody could submit to us what they feel is necessary. And I know we've gotten those communications already from the Water Authority and maybe some others, but if there are specific topics that we can narrow down for discussion, then it's up to you as executive officer and LAFCO staff to make that determination whether or not it merits this ad hoc committee reconvening again. We can do so accordingly. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. And perhaps one way to facilitate that decision-making is for, and I would ask this, Adam, of you, to meet with individual members to reiterate the issues that we have been informed, whether it be through Water Authority's letters or Fallbrook-Rainbow letters and everything in between, coupled with the mandatory factors that Priscilla and Carol are going to have to address under statute. If there are topics that the committee members individually rise as priorities that they would like to better participate in, And then you could share that with me, and that could inform my decision as to what content, additional content I'd like the ad hoc committee to weigh in on. I think that might be the most constructive way to go forward today.
I would agree, and I think it respects everybody's desires here, since there are some members outside the subject agencies that have noted that their duty has been expired. So Sandy, you have another comment?
I do, and I know we're trying to wrap this up. This is very important. I just want to say that there's no precedent for a county transferring their assessed value to another county for purposes of voting power. And losing this voting power is frankly a far bigger risk than anything that we've discussed today. We just won a lawsuit in this very issue that Eastern was on the other side of, and received distribution of millions of dollars for that lawsuit. I think the fact of having private meetings are inappropriate on issues that could lead to San Diego water rates being determined by people outside of this county and in Riverside County. So I will conclude my comments, but this is very important and serious work, and it takes time. And as I said earlier, is a precedent setting, and it's going to take the time it needs to take.
Nick?
Yeah, as I've been sort of listening to this discussion, I honestly just cannot, it's really hard to just ignore some of the regional impacts that I think this decision is going to have. And so, I mean, again, listening to sort of, Keene, Adam, Fallbrook and Rainbow, I do generally have this feeling that I think just one more meeting is insufficient, and especially given the timeline that Keene kind of just laid out too. So I don't have the answer for what that looks like. I've already submitted, what it is that I would like to see be contemplated by this group. And I think there's other things that are worthy of that consideration. So I'm not sure how the best process is. Having this forum and us deciding that scheduling, I'm not sure is the best way to do it. But what I will just say is that, at the end of the day, I do think we at least need more than just one more meeting than for this group to consider, particularly for the regional impacts that I think the decision of this magnitude will have.
Understood. Jack?
Yeah, and I just want to say I support what Keene and Adam laid out. I mean, yes, as Fallbrook, I'm probably more used to not getting my way than the Water Authority or the City of San Diego, perhaps. So I understand that there's some issues that people have, but ultimately, it's the executive officer who gets to make the decision on what items they think they have covered and what items they need input on, and I'm fine with that. And if there are some items that are really important to the city that it gets determined makes sense for this group to talk further about, I'm fine with that. As Keene said, there's some processes that are ongoing with the application, so hopefully we can just kind of work those in parallel and get everything to sort of a summer timeline. But again, I'm fine with the idea of all of us submitting what we think is important. I'm also respectful of those that have committed a bunch of time to this. If they've been on this and feel like, maybe they don't need to be part of the discussion, that maybe the committee can adjust who shows up or who's involved also for those topics. So I think we just need very clear discussion about exactly what topics we're talking about, exactly how they're related to, detachment of Fallbrook and Rainbow, the roll-off versus detachment issue that may become more of an issue with the Water Authority MSR. We're probably not going to solve as part of this process. If we feel like this group should get into the details of met voting rights and what does that mean, I'm not sure this is going to be the best forum for it, but if that's what Keene feels, then so be it.
Nick, do you have more to add, or? Okay.
No, sorry.
No problem. Well,
Adam, here's what I said. this is what I would suggest. I'm hearing active or at least passive agreement that our baseline that you introduced in the beginning of this item needs more muscle, in that more than one meeting is needed. I agree with that after hearing everyone speak. I would ask that you proceed as you see fit, Adam, in engaging the committee on prioritizing what, if any, but I assume there will be topics that they've heard today or others that we then can digest at staff and develop an agenda for the next meeting with the analysis that goes with it. I will be rather candid at this moment that when the city of San Diego identifies the concern about roll-off versus departure and understanding that half of the county's population is affected, we're going to take notice of that, and we want to make sure that we are dotting our I's on those topics. But I also want to make clear to our applicants, Jack and Tom, you also have the right to have your proposals processed in an expedient manner. We're doing that, believe it or not. And I saw your body language, Jack, when I said end of summer, and I understand the frustration. So I understand that, but we are dealing with a rather significant set of proposals here. So please bear with us.
Okay, so with that said, I think you've tasked me to reach out to the committee members and have them narrow down their scope of items to have reviewed by this committee. We will work through that and shuffle through that and deem appropriate of when and what this committee will circle up and discuss again.
Yeah. And just maybe one thing, Alex, I don't want to get myself in Brown Act trouble. So if I have provided any direction to Adam that creates any pause on you, perhaps you can work with us offline to make sure that we're all good on that front.
Okay. Any other comments or questions from the committee? All righty. Well, thank you for your extended time. I think I've got my direction. I'll be reaching out to all of you. A future meeting looks to be in place, but time and date is to be determined. So we'll work with you all accordingly. And I will adjourn this meeting at 12:34, and thank you all for your participation.